On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we continue our look at the New York Giants 2024 opponents with a visit out to Seattle with Corbin Smith, host of Locked On Seahawks. Corbin breaks down the Seahawks changes. Plus, towards the end, we talk about why Drew Lock should actually be in competition with Daniel Jones. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants on SI. You can find my written work over at si.com/NFL/Giants. And welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, and everybody else in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, we are continuing our look at the New York Giants 2024 regular season opponents. And today we are going to take a look at the Seattle Seahawks. And here to help me break it down is Corbin Smith. He is the host of Locked On Seahawks. He is also the site publisher of Seahawks on SI, which is one of the sister sites of Giants on SI. Corbin, welcome on into the pod.
Thanks for having me, Patricia. I appreciate it.
Always good to see you, my friend. All right, Corbin, first thing we got to discuss, obviously, Seattle. Brand new head coach, years of Pete Carroll. They decided to go in a different direction. And I don't know, when I saw that, it kind of reminded me when the Giants transitioned off of Tom Coughlin after so many years and so many, successes and ups and downs and whatnot. But what has been the tempo, the mood so far with Mike McDonald having taken over for Pete Carroll?
I think that it's gone way more smoothly than anybody could have anticipated. And some will say, well, that's a homer viewpoint. No, I mean, I've been at the facility. I've seen the way the players have responded. And I think that a lot of the returning players, it was not a shot on Pete Carroll. I just think that they felt like things needed to be ratcheted down a little bit, that the ship got too loose last year, so to speak. And the culture that Pete Carroll built was obviously an incredible one. They made the playoffs 10 out of 14 years. He was a head coach. You can't take away any of the things that Pete Carroll accomplished, but I think everything's got an expiration date. And a lot of these players that are returning, your Leonard Williams, who obviously played for the Giants, players like Noah Fant, a lot of these veterans that have been with the team the last couple of years, they have been pretty honest assessing that they needed to make a change where they take things a little bit maybe more seriously. They are looking at things being more structured. The practices are definitely more structured than what they were under Pete Carroll. And again, this is not taking shots at Pete Carroll, incredibly successful NFL coach, but change can be a good thing. And so far, the players on this roster, the new guys coming in, have been nothing but effusing praise of Mike McDonald. And he seems to be building a good rapport with his players as well.
What about the changes in, defense and in offense? I mean, Pete Carroll was a defensive-minded coach, so I'm sure the defense is going to undergo a change. How much of a change are they looking at?
I don't think that you're going to see quite as many differences with the scheme compared to what Pete Carroll ran. The big differences are going to be the way that scheme is orchestrated. Mike McDonald in Baltimore did a phenomenal job of building a complex defense where there were tons of disguises pre-snap, very difficult to have a read on what they're going to be running coverage-wise, who's going to be coming to the blitz, who's going to be dropping back. They ran a lot of simulated blitz pressures where you only had 4 rushers, but it looked like a blitz. You got a linebacker or a corner, or maybe you've got 2 guys from the secondary coming, and yet you still are dropping 7 back into coverage. He has been a master of both those things. So I think you couple that with the fact that he's going to be moving guys along the defensive line more than what we've seen in the past. Leonard Williams is going to play all over the place. They're going to be playing Draymond Jones all over the place, Jared Reed all over the place. Those are the big differences there. And I felt like this was too stagnant of a defense for several years running, where back in the Legion of Boom era, Seattle could say, hey, we're running cover 3. Good luck, because they had such a phenomenal secondary that it didn't matter. But once that talent was gone, you can't continue to play that style. And it was too easy to get a read on what the Seahawks were doing defensively. Mike McDonald is going to be the polar opposite, and you can expect this is going to be a complex defense that's going to make life tough on offenses pre-snap.
What about on the offensive side of the ball? How much do you anticipate that changing?
Ryan Grubb's system, I'm really curious to see how similar it is to what he did at Washington. Obviously, the Huskies had one of college football's best offenses. As far as things that I'm anticipating that we're going to see, I think there's going to be less leaning on multiple tight end sets. There's going to be more 3-4 wide receiver sets. I think you're going to see a lot of shotgun. Run game is going to be the thing that I'm fascinated by, because Grubb's history has mainly been heavy zone, but they ran more than 50% gap last year at Washington. So I think a lot of it's going to boil down to how the personnel shakes up front. They're going to have 3 new starters on their offensive line. I don't know that he's going to be able to run his passing game exactly the same as he did at Washington. There are always adaptations you got to make to be successful against NFL defenses. But I would anticipate that you're still going to see a lot of emphasis on the deep ball. Ryan Grubb loves that. He loves the explosive passing game. And really that plays to Geno Smith's strengths as well.
Now, this past offseason, Seattle acquired Washington Commanders quarterback Sam Howell. They already have Geno Smith. Hey, Giant fans, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So go on and keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. What's going on with the quarterback situation? Is there a legitimate competition brewing there, or what was the thinking behind that, do you think?
There is not a competition that is going on right now. And if you were at OTAs at minicamp, Geno Smith is light years ahead of Sam Howell right now. And that's not to say that Sam Howell cannot be their starter as early as 2025. I still believe the kid's got a lot of talent. And he had a disadvantage here. He didn't know he's never played with any of the guys in Seattle. Geno Smith is learning a new system, but he's got all the same receivers, running backs. He's got that continuity. Sam Howell is not only learning a new system, he's also trying to learn what ticks with his new receivers. He's not getting a lot of reps with the stud receivers. He's playing with second teamers. So it's going to take some time, but that was a move that was looking towards the future. Right now, they believe Geno Smith gives them the best chance to win, and you see the practices, you can see that. Geno Smith just looks to be in full command of this offense. Howell made some improvements as OTAs and minicamp went on, but it's going to be a process. I think they're going to be using training camp right now to see where he may fit in beyond this year. And it does give them an upgrade at their backup quarterback spot. And by the way, Howell was younger than a lot of these drafted in the first round. So John Schneider looked at it, hey, we're not going to get any of these top quarterbacks at pick 16. We don't have the capital to move up. Let's go get a player we were really high on in the draft process a couple of years ago, and we can see if Sam Howell can develop under Ryan Grubb and become a starting quarterback long-term for us.
Corbin, one of the, you talk about draft picks. One of the draft picks that I think maybe underperformed a little bit is Jackson Smith-Njigba. What do they have to do to unlock him? How is this offensive scheme maybe going to unlock more of his potential in this offense?
You know, you have to take the offseason workouts with a grain of salt, because you're not playing real football. As Mike McDonald called them, they're passing camps. At the same time, every year there's a couple players that just jump out and you're like, that guy is going to have a breakout season. Jackson Smith-Njigba has been that player for the Seahawks this spring. And He was really good the last 9 or 10 games last year for the Seahawks. He started slow, and you do have to remember he's got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett taking a lot of the targets. So as an incoming rookie, even as a first rounder, there were some growing pains there just in terms of there's only one football to go around. But the second part of the year, Geno Smith started to build more chemistry with him. This offseason, those two have been on fire. So I think the Seahawks, they're looking at this being Jackson Smith and Jigba taking the torch from Tyler Lockett this year to be the number 2 receiver. I've even been bullish enough predicting that I think Smith and Jigba is going to lead the team in receptions, because I look at what Ryan Grubb's offense did at Washington. Everybody talks about Rome Odunze, and obviously he was an incredible player, number 9 overall pick. But Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk, they're 2 other stud receivers that got drafted in April. Those guys did a ton of damage from the slot. And Jackson Smith and Jigba has the ability to win downfield. He can beat you over the middle. He's dominant in the intermediate passing game. I just think this scheme, the way that Ryan Grubb uses his receivers, no player in this offense is going to benefit more from that than Jackson Smith and Jigba, especially with him and Geno Smith now having much better chemistry than they did this time a year ago. So I think he is on the cusp of having a breakout season for the Seahawks.
All right, Giant fans, you are listening to the Locked On Giants podcast. My special guest is Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks as we preview the Seattle Seahawks, whom the Giants will see in 2024. When we come back, we're going to explore the biggest concerns on the offense and defensive sides of the ball for Seattle. Don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. My guest today is Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks, and we are previewing the Seattle Seahawks. We know we got training camp. The rosters aren't set, but we've got some, questions that have developed. We have some rough ideas as to how things will shape up. And Corbin, let's talk about some of the biggest question marks on the Seattle team. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. What are you most curious to see play out?
It all revolves around the offensive line. Seattle has arguably, I think you could argue Seattle has the best overall skill player talent in the NFL. They've got 2 really good running backs. They've got a tight end in Noah Fant that's talented. They haven't used him enough. And you've got that stud receiving core that has 3 elite receivers with Jackson Smith and Jigba now rising up. But it won't matter how much skill player talent they have if the offensive line is not able to come together. And last year, this group was ravaged by injuries. Abraham Lucas missed 11 of the 17 games. He had off-season knee surgery, has not participated at all in the off-season program. He looks to be trending in the right direction to be ready early in camp to come back to the field. That would be huge for this team. They need Charles Cross, the former top 10 pick, to start playing to that level. The last 2 years, he's been decent, but not great. They need him to take a huge step forward. And then in the interior, they've got 3 brand new starters that are going to be breaking in. Laken Tomlinson has played a ton of snaps. He had a rough year for the Jets last year, but I've made this argument all offseason long. Nobody could have played offensive line well for that New York Jets team last year. It was a dumpster fire. I think Laken Tomlinson is primed to have a nice rebound season for the Seahawks, and he gives them that veteran leader in the interior. Oluwatimi at center, first-year starter, has 1 start under his belt, but played a ton of snaps in college, a guy that I think is going to be a solid starter in the league. We'll see how he handles his first year as a full-time starter. Right guard, it's anyone's guess who's going to start there. I think there's 3 players that could win the starting job for week 1 at this point. Rookie Christian Haynes, a 3rd-round pick. I think that's who the Seahawks would like to see win that job. But Anthony Bradford, who started 10 games last year, showed some promise in those games. He's going to get his chance to hold on to that job. And then they've got a player, McClendon Curtis, that they got as an undrafted rookie off a practice squad from the Raiders last year that they're very high on. And he's been with the first team pretty much the entire offseason. So that's the big question mark, though. Who's going to be the starter at right guard? How does the new starter at center hold up? Is Laken Tomlinson going to be able to play closer to that Pro Bowl level he was with the 49ers a few years ago? There's just a lot of moving parts there. The offensive line has been a major problem for the Seahawks for more than a decade. They've had consistent issues being able to protect their quarterbacks, open up the run. So like usual, like clockwork, that is the big question mark. Is this offensive line going to be able to come together? The one reason there's optimism is because of the new line coach, Scott Huff, who was at Washington. He developed a couple of high draft picks in this last draft up front, real fundamental focused coach. So that's what they're going to be banking on. But that is clearly head and shoulders priority number one, concern number one on offense for the Seattle Seahawks, trying to figure out that offensive line.
Sound familiar, Giant fans? We're going through the same thing, almost just about the same thing, where the offensive line just hasn't been good for most of the last decade. All right, Corbin, same question for the defensive side of the ball. Where is your biggest concern on the defensive side of the ball?
This is just like the offensive side of the ball. I don't even have to think about this one. It's inside linebacker, the off-ball linebacker position. And Seahawks fans, a lot of Seahawks fans are probably going to be hoping that the player's name is on the helmet, like you sometimes see in training camp, because Bobby Wagner's gone for the second time in 3 years. Jordan Brooks goes to Miami. Devin Bush, who was their main backup, he's gone, went to Cleveland. They completely retooled this linebacker group. And Jerome Baker, he's been a starter for 6 years in Miami, a solid player, but he's coming off wrist surgery, did not do anything in the offseason. Tyrell Dodson, the other linebacker that signed in free agency, has started 15 games his entire career. Now, he played well for Buffalo in 10 starts last season, but still a small sample size. Both those guys are on one-year deals, so you've still got a lot of questions long-term, and both of them missed the entire offseason program. So are they going to be ready for training camp? Are they going to be able to make up ground? And you are obviously replacing a legend in Bobby Wagner, who still had a really good year last year. So that position behind those two players, and one of them is not ready early in camp, the four players behind him, they like rookie Tyrese Knight, but he's a rookie, and he's a fourth-round pick. Not going to want to start him early. John Radigan, Patrick O'Connell, another undrafted rookie, and Easton Gibbs. Those four players have a combined 19 defensive regular season snaps to their name. So if the Seahawks are without Dodson or Baker for an extended time in training camp of the preseason, that starts to get pretty scary. So that to me is easily the biggest weakness, and it's a position I could still see Seattle trying to find a way. Can we add another veteran to this group at some point? Because there's just so much inexperience there, so many question marks. That is a position that I think Seahawks fans have a lot of concern and a lot of worry about, and I get it. I certainly could see it being better than expected if Baker and Dodson end up panning out, but that could be a big if going into this season. So that is clearly head and shoulders above everything else. That's the biggest concern on defense for the Seahawks. Now,
Corbin, I think the last time the Giants played Seattle, and I get it was under a different coaching staff, different personnel and whatnot, but if I remember correctly, the strength of the Seahawks defense was the defensive front. Is that still the case, or has the strength of that defense shifted?
No, it's the interior defensive line now, because Leonard Williams re-signed. They drafted Byron Murphy the second in the first round, a player that I think is going to be electric. I'm really excited to see what he can do. And he's a guy that can move all up and down the line. Draymond Jones, Jaron Reed. That is the heart of this defense right now, is the defensive line. They're getting Uchenna Nwosu back healthy off the edge. Boy, Mafe had a breakout year last year. So that would be the strength. But what's interesting about this team is I think you could also make an argument, if everything plays out, the cornerback group is as dynamic as any in the NFL. Reek Woolen had a little bit of a step back last year. Devin Witherspoon, Rookie of the Year finalist. Giants fans, unfortunately, got to see what he's capable of doing. Had a pick six in that game last year. Huge hitter. Blitzes really well. He's just a do-it-all player. I don't know that we've seen a slot corner that can do everything that Devin Witherspoon can do. He is a phenomenal player. Mike Jackson and Trey Brown are really solid starters when they're used. So I think the cornerback group, you can make an argument, is right there with the defensive line. But to me, the heart and soul of this defense is that D-line with the experience they've got up front. The cornerback group might be the most talented one, though, on the roster.
What is Mike McDonald's approach to the pass rush? Is he more of a, get home with the front seven, or is he more, mixing up blitzes, exotic blitzes, or is he more straightforward?
It's interesting. The Ravens were not one of the top blitzing teams in terms of percentage last year. But when you watch the tape, you see all the different guys that he sent after quarterbacks. He loves to send corners. He loves to send his inside linebackers. He loves to send safeties. Even at OTAs, we got to see Rayshawn Jenkins do that quite a bit, where they blitzed him. So he made this clear at the league's annual meetings back in March that he needs players that can blitz, that have the ability to rush. Like, that is a big part. So Seattle, over the years, they tried to win with their front four and really get after it. The Ravens did that plenty. They had enough talent to do that, but they also were really good at mixing up their blitzes, and it wasn't predictable. They sent guys from everywhere. So that is going to be one of the significant changes. And again, that sim pressures that I talked about earlier in the show, where they're only sending 4, but they're dropping 1 or 2 guys from their D line, and then they're blitzing guys from the back half of the defense. They are going to find a lot of creative ways to try to disrupt the offensive line, confuse the offense, and get after the quarterback from different parts of the defense.
All right, Giant fans, you are listening to the Locked On Giants podcast. We are breaking down the Seattle Seahawks, who are on the Giants schedule this year. Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks is our special guest. When we come back, we'll talk more about some of the new faces on the Seahawks that we haven't yet covered, as well as some X factors. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't even sporting like I want them to be. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and my guest today is Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks, and we are talking Seattle Seahawks, getting a refresher. It's a team that the Giants for a while saw on a regular basis, and then it kind of got away because of the way the schedule fell, but they're going to see them this year on the road at Seattle. The longest trip that the Giants have on their schedule, if I'm not mistaken, since it's out west. And Corbin, let's talk about some of the newcomers to the Seahawks. You mentioned a few throughout the show. You mentioned, Roma Dunze, one of the defender. I forget. You mentioned a defender. Who are some of the other new faces? Whether it be rookies or veterans that you're really going to be dialed in on to see how they fit into the grand scheme of things.
On the offensive side of the ball, I mentioned Laken Tomlinson just because he's going to be the starter at left guard. They're going to be banking on him playing closer to his 2021 level than last year. And again, if you were playing with that Jets offensive line, good luck. It was just an unmitigated disaster. So I think he, by default, just playing with a different team, I think he's going to be able to get back to his rhythm, be able to play at a high level. George Fant, they brought him back in. He started his career in Seattle, undrafted free agent out of Western Kentucky, former college basketball player. He's ended up having a really good NFL career, but that was a great pickup insurance policy-wise in case Abraham Lucas continues to have knee issues. So Fant is a player worth watching. And in tight end, they lost 2 of their 3 main players, Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly. Pharaoh Brown came over from the Patriots, more known for his blocking, can catch the ball a little bit. They added A.J. Barner in the draft, but Pharaoh Brown is going to have a significant role in this offense as the secondary tight end to Noah Fant. So they're going to be counting on him to help the run game with the blocking, the physicality that he brings as an inline wide tight end. On defense, I mentioned the 2 linebackers. Those were big moves, getting Dodson and Baker. They're going to be counting on them to be able to jump right in. They didn't do anything this offseason, but hoping to get them back early in training camp and get them rolling. So by week 1, they're good to go at middle linebacker. And then the front line, Jonathan Hankins, to me, not just because he's a massive human being, but that was one of the underrated signings for this team because they did not have a true nose tackle on the roster last year. And that was part of the reason they got ran all over last season. I think Jonathan Hankins is the type of player they desperately needed, a seasoned veteran, a space eater that also can make some plays on his own, had 3 sacks last year for the Dallas Cowboys. And Rayshon Jenkins, that is the other player that I was really excited to see the Seahawks bring in because Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, they just were getting too expensive, and Adams obviously had major injury issues. So they decided to cut both of them. They are much cheaper at safety this year, but I think the results in the field could be very similar. Rayshon Jenkins has some versatility. He's been an underrated player for most of his career. A guy that does a lot of things really well, maybe not elite at any one thing, but can play both safety positions. And he's a guy that has some blitzing ability. So Mike McDonald was excited about that. He wants interchangeability in the secondary. Rayshon Jenkins and Julian Love both provide that ability to play both safety positions, come up in the box, even play in the slot if needed. So I think Jenkins is going to be a player that's going to be a really good addition short term for the Seahawks in that secondary.
All right. Now, I know, again, it's early, and I know you probably haven't studied the Giants personnel and don't know it as well as I do. But that being said, no Saquon Barkley, no Darren Waller. They've added Malik Neighbors to the receiving core. Daniel Jones is projected to be back if healthy. On defense, they have Brian Burns that they've added to that pass rush. They lost cornerback Adoree Jackson to free agency. They didn't re-sign him. So right now it looks like Cordell Flott's going to be in there. So when you consider these major changes or storylines for the Giants, how do you see the Seahawks matching up against the Giants based on what we know today?
I think that this is a matchup that the Seahawks will be really excited about. Now, if the Giants decide, this is just my opinion, Patricia. I got to watch Drew Lock the last 2 years. I've gotten to watch Daniel Jones for several years running. I feel like that should be a competition, in my opinion. I don't think, coming off injury especially, I don't think Daniel Jones, even with the money they're paying him, I wouldn't just be like, oh, you're our guy. And I look at what the Seahawks were able to do to their offensive line last year. If the Giants are not able to rapidly improve up front with the line that the Seahawks have, they didn't have Leonard Williams on that D-line when they played there last year. So as long as they have all their pieces in place and they're healthy, Mike McDonald now being the coach, he's really the defensive coordinator. He's going to be calling plays this year. I look at that being a huge advantage for the Seahawks, especially with their home crowd. The Giants offense is going to have to deal with the noise factor of the 12s. That, to me, is the area that really stands out where it feels like Seattle's going to have a major advantage. And with their secondary, they feel like they can match up with Malik Neighbors, no matter who's the quarterback position. On offense, the key is going to be protection. As I mentioned, you could say the Giants maybe have some advantages there with some of the talent they still have on that front line, Dexter Lawrence and company. Can they keep that pass rush away from Geno Smith to allow him to get the football to his receivers? So, like a lot of games, I think it's going to boil down to the trenches when we get to that point. But it feels like the Seahawks have a big advantage on the D-line. Giants could have an advantage against Seattle's offensive line if that group is not able to mesh quickly.
You mentioned Drew Lock, so I want to stay on that for a minute because you're not alone. You're not the first person who has said to me that there should be a competition between Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. What is it about Drew Lock's game? I mean, that you think that right now he's on par with Daniel Jones to where it should be a competition? And what advantage do you think he has over Daniel Jones is based on his experience?
I think the thing that really stood out to me, and this was just in the 2 years in Seattle, I felt like Drew Lock made significant progress with his decision-making. He still uncorked some throws during his time in Seattle. You're like, what are you doing? But he really made improvements. And then when they beat the Eagles on Monday Night Football, he was starting for an injured Geno Smith and completed more than 70% of his passes, didn't throw any interceptions, had the game-winning touchdown throw to Jack Smith and Jigba inside the final minute. I mean, he did a lot of things in that game that showed me great growth at the quarterback position. He played well in spurts against the 49ers on the road the week before. Didn't get much help, but you saw a lot of progress. I feel like he gained more confidence late last year, starting those couple of games. And he's still a fairly young quarterback, too. I look at his skill set. I think he's got a better arm than Daniel Jones. I think he is better at reading defenses than Daniel Jones. And he is an underrated athlete. He's not the athlete Daniel Jones is when healthy, but he's not a Statue of Liberty either. He's not somebody that's going to be completely immobile in the pocket. I just think Drew Lock, there's more intrigue there. We have seen enough of Daniel Jones that I feel like Drew Lock at this point, with what he did in Seattle the last couple of starts he had, there's enough intrigue there that if I was the Giants, I'd be wanting to see it. Can he push Daniel Jones? Can he get over Daniel Jones? If I was in the Giants coaching staff and I was in the brass making a decision there, I just feel like, especially with Jones coming off an ACL tear, I would have this wide open, and I'd let Drew Lock have a legitimate opportunity based on what I saw last year. I just see a kid that's matured, and I think he's playing smarter football at quarterback, and he's got the physical tools. He always has.
Where did he come up short then in his battle with Geno Smith?
For one thing, Geno Smith had the advantage. He already had been with the team the previous season. He had some built-in chemistry with a number of the players that were there. And let's give Geno Smith credit. Geno Smith has been in the top 6 in almost every major category over the last 2 years throwing the football. It's not like this has been a small sample size. He has been arguably a top 10 quarterback when you're looking at the last 2 seasons. That's what he showed on the practice field. And then Drew Lock got COVID in the middle of preseason too. That really ended whatever competition was there, unfortunately. So I think that the Seahawks clearly made the right choice there, but that doesn't mean that Drew Lock can't compete somewhere else for a job either. Again, I saw a guy that put the work in and really improved during his time in Seattle and still a fairly young quarterback. I just think a team like the Giants that may not have that long-term answer at QB, let this guy compete and let him, if he beats out Daniel Jones, to me, that's a win for you. You upgraded your quarterback spot and makes your decision-making for the future with Daniel Jones easier.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as Drew's concerned, I think he'll probably take the bulk of the preseason snaps. And yeah, it is kind of a weird situation that the Giants would just come right out and say, okay, Daniel's the starter regardless, and not even have a competition. I'm with you. I think there should be, but they apparently are going to run it back with him. And they feel that, last year was an aberration, that, it was a result of, the offensive line being so bad, the injuries, this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, okay, we're still asking about Daniel Jones now going into year 6. So when does it stop? So yeah, I agree with you that there should be a competition, but the Giants, they're rolling it back with him, and we'll see how he does. But anyway, Corbin, appreciate you coming on, giving us some overview of the Seattle Seahawks. He is Corbin Smith, host of Locked On Seahawks. Giant fans, please check out his work as well as all of our Locked On hosts. We've got all 32 NFL teams covered. We've got most major college programs covered, basketball, baseball, hockey. We got all that covered for you. We've got fantasy football starting up soon, draft starting up soon. So much here on the Locked On Network. So please, if you get a chance, check some of that work out. For Corbin Smith, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, I will catch you again tomorrow.